Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tolerating one more speech on cannabis. I swear I'll change the topic next time. But I wanted to do a persuasive speech today. So let me talk you through cannabis since 1996, from assassin of youth to childhood epilepsy treatment. An interesting arc. So 22 years ago, when California first legalized medical cannabis, a lot of people thought, well, that's California. We know what Californians are like. As it turns out, at that point, only about a third of Americans believe that cannabis should be legalized. And things have changed radically since then. At this point, 2/3 believe cannabis should be legalized, and 90% believe that it should be available for medical treatment. So it's a very different world where 33 states have medical laws now. 8 states have adult use laws allowing any adult to go into the store and buy cannabis products. And all but Nebraska and Idaho allow CBD, the non-psychoactive extract from cannabis, to be sold in any store in the state. But thinking back 22 years, how many of you would have predicted that any of this would prove true? That cannabis would get legalized and it would prove to be relatively harmless for adults, that it would actually improve health outcomes, including for some children, and be a boon to the overall economy. Not many people, and largely because of this guy, Harry J. Anslinger, deeply disappointed enforcer of alcohol prohibition. Looking for a job after prohibition ended, he was given the job of heading up the new DEA. And he took to it with a vengeance, with this kind of attitude about cannabis, that marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. So a lot of us who've known people that fell asleep from it have to wonder about that. He was ably abetted by this man, William Randolph Hearst, the chief propagandist in the early days of this debate over cannabis, and really the inventor of yellow journalism. But he also invented this idea that it's a gateway drug to the hard stuff, and that basically they're coming for your children, those drug dealers. That whole campaign, starting with the Marijuana Tax Act of '37, which first made cannabis illegal, led to this moment, 1972, when Richard Nixon launched the war on drugs with his Controlled Substances Act, likening cannabis to heroin in Schedule I as the most dangerous, least useful, and scariest of all the drugs, which prompted Elvis to actually invite himself to the White House to volunteer to be a foot soldier in this war on drugs for Nixon. And the irony of that, of course, hard to avoid. Time passed, and it finally became an issue in a political campaign, 1992. The first baby boomer president was just a little bit nervous to admit that he might have ever seen cannabis before. He actually said, only outside the country while I was in Oxford, didn't like it, didn't inhale it. And it took really 12 years later that the first admitted inhaler of cannabis became our president. His famous line was, inhale it, I thought that was the whole idea. He was actually a legend in high school in Punahou High in Oahu. He was the guy who invented the intercept, where you run around the circle of friends sharing a joint and get an extra hit before everybody gets one. So our chief Bogarter-in-chief actually didn't do much for cannabis legalization as president. He was, I think, frozen in place by his admission of having used it ever. But Colorado moved ahead without the federal government and legalized adult use in 2014. And the sky did not fall. In fact, the Republican governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper, later defended the move to Jeff Sessions, who was appointed later Attorney General, saying, hey, it's been great for the state. We're making tax money. Nothing's gone wrong. In fact, teenage use of cannabis is down, because where can the kids find it? Because the illicit market's going away, and the stores themselves won't sell it to them. So lots of unintended consequences that have been positives from legalizing cannabis. So many of those are self-reported by consumers in the survey work we do. Half of consumers say that they've reduced their prescription drug use and their over-the-counter medication use because they're using cannabis instead, especially for pain relief. And 40% say that cannabis has a role in their general personal health and wellness regime. More importantly, the science is now coming in, and the Health and Human Services Department of the federal government says that in states that have medical cannabis laws, opioid use and death from overdose is down by as much as 30%. So there hasn't been a lot of science around cannabis, but there's starting to be some. And then this shows that even the less preferred health-wise way of consuming it, of smoking it, is declining. Flower used to be 40% of sales in Colorado. According to our tracking, it's now down to 40%. So healthier forms of consumption are replacing the inhaling of tar, if you will. And then this big moment. Last year, the FDA finally said it actually does have efficacy. There is something that cannabinoids are good for. This is CBDs, the non-psychoactive version, as a treatment for horrible Tourette syndrome and other childhood epilepsy, grand mal seizure diseases, where it actually reduces them from 300 or so a week in some kids to a couple a day. So a remarkable finding from the government scientists really in charge of sort of arguing that this has no value. So by moving the illicit business into legal channels, there's also been this huge economic impact, positive economic impact in states that have done it, just growth and overall economic impact, lots of jobs, lots of science jobs, lots of high marketing and high-end corporate kinds of jobs like mine. And then of course the boom of tax revenues, billions of dollars being generated for states around the country from taxes on legal cannabis. Main focus of a lot of the activity and the benefit is California. This is a company in San Francisco, Pax Labs, that was just valued at $5 billion in a deal last year for inventing this little device here, a vape device, and making a multi-millionaire out of this fine young gentleman, a marketing chief at the company. So all of those benefits have come from legalizing cannabis, proved to be relatively harmless, improved health outcomes, including even for children, some children, and generally a boon to the economy. So that's been the benefits. And then when you think about the adult use side of things, you just have to ask yourself, who would you rather party with? These guys or these guys?
Thank you, Pat. Tom. From assassin of youth to FDA approval. Take 2. You were giving your third project with the objective of taking feedback from the last speech that you gave and improving upon it. I thought your last speech, which I was present for and enjoyed, was very interesting. And I thought this one was even more interesting. You have a very casual and comfortable way of presenting, and you always have meddlesome, and that's with a T, humor, and great quotes. You have that down. There are 2 things, though, that I want you to think about working on. The first one is how you were standing to the side. It was perfect for me because I was there, but this was your stance for most of the speech. And so you were cutting out all of your right audience. Maybe if you are not hanging on the presentation slides for going with your speech, that might help, so just not relying on them. I think relying was the word I wanted to find. The second thing is your organization. I found 2 ways that you organize the speech, and I will say that it made it loosely organized because you could have gone one way or the other and tightened it up depending on which way you chose. The first way was with the 3 points that came in at the bottom of your introduction, and then you used them again for your conclusion. So maybe if you were to do another speech on cannabis, you can choose that way and really make it a tighter organization. However, I liked the other way you organized it, and that was with a timeline. And using that timeline and the slides, which I thought your slides were great. I mean, there was a lot of information, but I still was following you as I looked at the slides. But using those timelines, and then even when you didn't have it, you said it, that was very good. I would probably go that route and just make it better. You asked me about ums. You did not have any ums, just a couple of lip smacks, and right at the end you were kind of slapping your hand with your main points at the end. So, very good speech. I look forward to hearing the rest of your speeches. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.